Hello and welcome to the Bpositive Bloodstream, a podcast providing insights, stories and experiences from and for all those affected by acute leukaemia and beyond. My name is Jonjo Rooney and I'm the founder of Bpositive and the host of the Bloodstream. So why a podcast? Well, the one thing I lacked when I was diagnosed with leukemia back in 2006 was hearing from people who knew what it was like to embark on a similar journey to myself. It's my hope that by sharing inspiring interviews from people who've either been affected firsthand in some way by blood cancer or who've had similar experiences that others can resonate with, then we can help support those in need. I want these podcasts to provide help, inspiration and belief to all people. Bpositive is both my blood group and my adopted mantra that I held throughout my treatment. I hope you enjoy our interviews, and if you wish to get in touch with us, then please do so by emailing us at info@bpositive.org.uk, or you can find us on Twitter at b_positive_org. In this episode, I wanted to chat to you all about moments that matter, essentially, and in particular a couple of occasions throughout my treatment that have stayed with me today, which is nearly 12 years on from when I was diagnosed. Of course, there's absolutely loads of memories that stay with me, loads of things that I remember really fondly, some things not so fondly, but the ones I wanted to briefly chat to you about today, I wanted to draw on experiences because they represent moments that I think I'd envisaged during those dark and lonely nights of treatment. I kind of looked forward to these moments, and I just wanted to bring in the reality of how that was and how I felt at the time. Now, being in hospital for such a lengthy period of time, even at one time, yes, you have times when you can get out of your hospital room, but I was in isolation for such long periods, that obviously brings many memories. There's lots of ups and lots of downs that you can go through on a daily basis. I found that throughout my time at Worcester Royal Hospital, which for those of you who don't know, and you may not know, I was treated at Worcester Royal Hospital for my chemotherapy, and I had my bone marrow transplant at Birmingham, because Worcester don't do bone marrow transplants, or I certainly didn't when, I think they do it now actually, but I could be wrong, but they certainly didn't do it back in 2006 when I was diagnosed. Also, I'm grew up in Bromsgrove, which is caught between both hospitals, so they used to work together. So chemotherapy patients would be treated at Worcester, and transplants, they would be sent over to Birmingham, and that's what happened for me. But throughout my time at Worcester, where I was isolated for large periods for my chemotherapy treatment, I found that I was absolutely counting down the days until I'd be allowed to leave the hospital for good. It just feels like such a long hurdle. You're told at the time of diagnosis that, listen, you're looking at a 2-year treatment plan here. Now, I know that when you're looking at 2 years ahead, having had your life thrown upside down, that feels like an unbelievable amount of time. But it was important to break that down into different bits. So actually, I was just looking forward to leaving the hospital, turning back and actually moving on with the next step. I was actually quite fortunate that I got allowed to leave the hospital on a few occasions, because my hometown of Bromsgrove was relatively near to Worcester. You're talking 20 minutes away, 25 minutes away. So they could see I was in need of leaving hospital psychologically and definitely breaking away where I could. So after a long period of being isolated for probably up to 6 weeks, I did have little moments where I was allowed back, and yeah, I absolutely needed that, and that was gravely important for me. But I remember the first time I was allowed to leave my isolation room. I think it was, as I say, about 6 weeks in. Obviously, it's all cut and thrust when you get into hospital. Certainly, when most people are diagnosed with leukemia, it comes out of the blue. Treatment needs to start straight away. It certainly needed to in my instance, with my white blood cell count being astronomically high. So I had a solid 6 weeks in an isolation room. Now I'd come out of an ambulance, like from the Sunday morning I was brought over into Worcester from Redditch. Straight out the ambulance was just wheelchaired into a room. I didn't leave that room for 6 weeks. I was in isolation. I didn't get to see any other patients. I got to see their names on the menus, but that was the extent of my interaction with them. Apart from that, I was in my own room. And as such, I had absolutely no idea of the layout of the hospital, as I was taken from an ambulance effectively straight into treatment. But I grew close, and I grew very used to my isolation room. It felt like mine. I made it mine. I had cards up and messages of goodwill and things. It was a Christmas period, so there was Christmas cards and things like that going around. But it felt like my life, I suppose, was pretty much in that room. And it was absolutely, for the first few months after being diagnosed, my whole being was spent entirely within those small four walls with one little window at the back. And that window I used to go out and, well, I didn't go out, I used to approach the window and wave at passers-by. They probably thought I was an absolute nutcase, but I was craving any kind of interaction. People who know me well know I'm a people person and I need to be around people, so being isolated was quite difficult. But yeah, I used to wave to these passers-by, barely ever got a wave back. I think they thought, who is this guy? Those people could be nurses arriving to work or visitors to the hospital or people going to there was some kind of barn or something backing onto the hospital, so there was like a country club thing, so I think people there, I would wave to anyone who would look up. So that was me. I was in my four walls and I was absolutely isolated, but I remember being told, listen, your neutrophil counts had risen sufficiently. Now your neutrophil is a part of your white blood cell that handles the response to bacteria and infection, and you live by those numbers when you're going through anything like leukemia, because you need those numbers back then to be above 0.6. I don't know if that's still the case now, but obviously chemotherapy knocks all your counts down. It doesn't spare any of your blood counts. It has to kill everything, and that's its job. But your neutrophil counts go down with that, and that's why you're more susceptible for infection. But I remember being told, listen, your neutrophil counts, Jonjo, they're above 0.6. So I was no longer quite so susceptible to infection. And they could relax the walls a little bit and said, listen, you can get out of your isolation room and, don't do too much, but, come back. I think I had a couple of hours or something. But it was amazing to be told I didn't have to be kept in there. And obviously they don't want me to be around people for too long because there is still a risk of infection. I mean, I was on a very low, I had a very low barrier against infection compared to the normal Joe blogs, but I had enough there that I could leave, and honestly something like that really means the world. So it meant I could leave my room. Now, I'd grown very fond of the cooked breakfast that came from the canteen in the hospital. So for a few days a week, I would, when I was in my isolated room, one of the auxiliary nurses, Brenda, I think, or maybe Tracy, had told me, listen, we can go and get you a cooked breakfast if you want. And I was all over it. But obviously they knew I was all over it and didn't want me to have it every single day. We didn't want the food working against what the medicine was trying to do. But I got told, I could have that, and I absolutely took advantage of that. And so when I got told I could leave, that was the only thing I wanted to do, to go and take care of myself and go to the canteen and have a cooked breakfast, but not have it brought in foil to my bed. I could actually go and sit and be normal and just be a normal person. That means everything. But something bizarre happened. I mean, as I left the room, I felt like a lost puppy. I stood out like a sore thumb. I had my pyjama bottoms, I was carrying my drip, and I had a wispy head of hair. Not the look I was really after, but I didn't feel in any way self-conscious. I felt strangely proud in a weird way. Proud of the situation I was in and how I was getting through it, and how even just being able to leave your room was progress. So I didn't worry too much. However, immediately after I left the room, I felt totally disorientated, and I had to ask for directions. I felt odd. I mean, it looked like I'd escaped or something, but people were helpful and told me where to go, and it just felt like first day at school. It felt like all the eyes was on me. I mean, people had come in, and it was probably February time. There was people wrapped up for winter and on there walking around in pyjamas. But yeah, so I didn't mind. I proudly carried my drip and found my way to the canteen. By making my way out of the hospital and having a walk, it really did, and I can't overstate this, it gave me such a sense of fulfillment, and it gave me a semblance of control. Now, I've mentioned that term, semblance of control, in past podcasts I've done. For me, that's very important. If you can feel you've got a grip on it yourself, it will help you psychologically. It certainly did with me. But I felt I had a grip over my situation, and this was literally just me going for breakfast, but I felt I was doing something for myself. Everything's taking care of you when you're in hospital. You're on a conveyor belt of treatment. You can't move without being checked, prodded, blood taken. But now I could go out, walk my way to the canteen and have a breakfast. But I felt like I was progressing well, and indeed I was. I was often sat in my room, hearing noises from outside. You'd hear people talking, you'd hear things going on, you'd hear the nurses telling you about what was happening in the foyer. You just wonder what was out there. At least now I got to know what that was like. Now throughout my treatment in Worcester, I was, for so many of those long days, dreaming of the day I'd be able to leave. Now that day naturally drew closer, and I couldn't wait for it. I absolutely couldn't wait. I was very much aware that wouldn't be the end of my treatment. I knew I had Birmingham coming up. I knew I had my transplant looming over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't really relax, but because I was just completely fixed to the hospital and isolated from the majority of it, the thought of being able to leave was just incredible. It felt like a huge milestone, and it is a huge milestone to leave that world for a couple of months. I'd done my rounds of chemo, and that had thankfully got me to a state of remission. That was the plan. That's where I was at. I was told I was responding well. I was smashing things down, and it was going well. On a previous podcast, I think I mentioned about the being told about the transplant, which I won't go into now, but I certainly I knew the severity of it. I knew the risk that came with it, and I knew I had a couple of months to prepare for it. But this was a big milestone. A couple of months can feel like a lifetime, and I just couldn't wait to get myself out of the hospital, outside of the confines of being imprisoned in this world of leukemia and cancer all the time, and just have that bit of home comforts, have a bath, feel carpet on your feet. God, the feeling of carpet on your feet from a hard floor is something I'll always remember. But what I wanted to talk about was, one of these moments was the day I left Worcester. I think I expected some form of a big deal to be made. I don't know why. I knew all the staff. I'd grown so close to them. They were very much like my family. However, the day I left, it was a normal working day, and the staff were naturally preoccupied with other patients. Look, I wasn't running around expecting a fanfare, but it brought me back down to earth to think, God, there's so much more work to do. And although this is good for me, someone's straight into my room, straight into that hospital bed, sadly because they're in need of treatment too, and people are at the start of their journey for all this, and I was part way through mine, let's say halfway through mine. So I said some goodbyes to some of the staff, and all the talk was wishing me well and all the best for the treatment. And even that was a stark reminder. I was excited, I was buoyant just to be going home, and I had my massive trolley full of all my bags and all my belongings that I'd had with me for months on end, and I was just going to be putting that to rest for a few months until I moved to Birmingham for my transplant. But I suppose just hearing all the nurses just talk to me about it, they knew it wasn't the end for me. They knew I had a lot more to go, and I kind of wanted them to say well done, but actually it wasn't a case of well done. It was listen, good luck for everything, keep in touch. And I was probably feeling a bit panicked, and listen, I was very up and down emotionally, but something like that probably just reminded me of where I was. But listen, all the staff were positive, and there was hugs shared and everything, but it was very much back to work for them, and that hasn't really left me. I guess it was, I wouldn't say an anticlimax, because I was delighted to be going home, but it certainly was a stark reminder for me of the situation I was in, and certainly the situation other people were. But I'd overcome a huge hurdle in getting through my chemotherapy phase and being in a remission. Now I had a huge hurdle in getting through my transplant. So one thing I was told during my treatment for my bone marrow transplant, or stem cell transplant if you will, in Birmingham, I was told from one of the daily consultants who visits, Dr. Fiona Clark, she said, just tackle each day, take it step by step and focus on that. And she wasn't saying that like you wouldn't make it through a few days. And she didn't mean it in any kind of morbid way. She meant, listen, you're going to be here for a while, so just face each day, head on, focus on that, whatever your plan is for that day, knock that on the head, and then gradually you'll start ticking off the days. That's what she said to me. She was absolutely right. I knew I was stuck in isolation for a period of, well, at least 4 weeks for this procedure, because that is the deal with a bone marrow transplant. And I was told that the chemo I was going to be facing was up to 5 times stronger than what I'd faced in the months at Worcester. Now, in between Worcester and Birmingham, I probably had a couple of months where I was told to eat as much as I can, put on as much weight, because you're certainly going to lose it. I enjoyed that time, but I absolutely knew I had this big dark cloud over me. I couldn't really relax. Whilst the home comforts were good, you quickly get used to them. And although I was shot of my treatment at Worcester, I knew I had Birmingham lined up, and my transplant was a huge undertaking. I couldn't really shift that from my focus or my mind, really. So as much as it was great to relax and be away from the hospital, I was still seen by the district nurse every single day, having bloods taken, having consultations, having meetings, having to go to hospital, go to Birmingham for more tests. I wasn't really away from that world at all, and I knew I wasn't, because I had the big impending bone marrow transplant to get through. The chemotherapy I was going to get through was 5 times stronger, as I said. That was going to be, a huge task, because I got quite sick with the, as most people do, with the chemotherapy I'd had at Worcester to get me to this point. So knowing I was embarking in a world that was going to be 5 times stronger was, it was quite daunting. Right, so my family, they said they would constantly encourage me to look forward to the future, think about what I wanted to do next, make plans to go on holiday, travel the world. I always wanted to travel, maybe move to London, things like that, things I'd always said I wanted to do, but now I could allow myself to dream. As I said, I won't spend too much time drawing on my actual experience during the transplant. I've covered that in a previous podcast, and please check back at previous ones. I think we're on number 8 now. It was a few podcasts ago, but I certainly go into more depth about that. But this was really for discussing about the very special moment that I had in being told I could leave, and being told that I could go home for good. I must have been halfway through the week. I'd had severe mucositis, which burned me from my mouth to my exit due to the radiotherapy I had. I'd come through the worst of it, and I'd been on morphine due to the severity of my mouth sores. I couldn't pass anything orally for about a week. I couldn't swallow. I was really struggling. But I'd been coming out of this now for a few days, but I was still very much, weak, and in those days after you receive your cells, you are at your most vulnerable. But this was like a week past that, and my counts had started to rise. But I still felt I had another week or so, certainly half a week left until I could leave. That's so I thought. And on this morning, the sun was shining. The registrar, who I've referred to before as Dr. Doom, because he was the one who told me all about the transplant in the first place and dealt all these numbers and stats and facts and figures at me that scared the life out of me. We'd sort of struck up a bit of a chord now. The fear had gone from him, and he'd come in and open my curtains and chat to me and stuff. He came in, and I just thought we're here for normal test, prodding. I still felt very weak. I was off the morphine at this point. My mucositis had subsided, but I was still very weak. But he came in and he told me, your blood levels are looking quite good. And he just said some words that absolutely made my world. He said, how do you feel about going home today? I could not believe what he'd said. Absolutely couldn't believe it. I think I just responded with, yeah, I would absolutely love that. But I think I said to him, am I ready to? Am I right? And he said, yeah, your counts are good. My jaw absolutely dropped. It took me by complete surprise. He then began to explain the process of how I'd have to wait a little while to get my medication to take. This was first thing in the morning now. So he said, by lunchtime you should be looking to go. I felt absolutely dumbfounded. I felt jittery, I felt nervous. I couldn't actually believe I was well enough to finally get home. But this wasn't like Worcester. This wasn't just leaving for a brief period of a couple of months. This was me leaving now, and I could absolutely start recovering from everything I'd had to experience since being diagnosed in the December. This was late July, maybe start of August, and I was told I could start putting this behind me. I had this absolute amazing feeling of just overexcitement in my stomach when you're really excited for something. It's like a kid on Christmas Day. I couldn't believe it. Dr. Sridhar left the room, And this is where something really sticks with me and I'll never ever forget it. Something really special happened. Now, as he'd left, I had a little radio in my room. I had just a little radio. It was in 2006, so there's no smartphones or things like that, but I had a radio that I used to put on. The TV reception was dreadful in there. It was the old hospital in Birmingham. It's a lot better now, but the reception was pretty terrible, so I never used to use that. But I'd have my radio on each day. I think I had radio one on. And as he'd left, no sooner had he left, it felt like a soundtrack to my life. I heard the opening chords to the song by The Killers, All These Things That I've Done, and I won't sing it, but it starts with When There's Nowhere Else, you know the one. I couldn't believe it. It was perfectly timed, and I just cranked it up, and it felt like it was made for me. Now, I've always liked The Killers, loved them, but this song just became mine, and it just meant so much. When it was kicking in to the chord, I had tears down my cheeks. I felt very emotional. I was punching the air. I was jumping up and down. I couldn't believe that I was going to leave the hospital, leave the world of leukemia and cancer, leave treatment behind me and focus on just getting better. I was punching the air, like I said, with delight. It was like I was celebrating a goal. I was overcome with emotion and could finally, for the first time since being diagnosed, I could see the light. I could see that I could start putting all this behind me. That song has since just meant so much to me. Everyone likes The Killers, of course, but when you've got something that takes you back to a moment, it feels really, really special. A few years after that, I remember being at Pukkelpop Festival in Belgium with my friends, and it was the first time I ever got to see The Killers live, and I was just waiting for that song, and I was on my friend's shoulders, and as they were singing it, I was emotional. I was allowing myself a moment to pat myself on the back. I was definitely not sober, so the emotions were going to flow, but I had another moment recently, and I'm never one to lose sight of where you've been and what you've gone through. I mean, typically I talk about my own experience a lot to help other people. I speak to other people going through it. But I was at Glastonbury Festival, not this year, obviously, it wasn't on, it was last year, and The Killers did a surprise gig on the John Peel stage, and to date it's probably as good as any gig I've been a part of. It was all tipped off in a secret. It was a secret gig. They'd come on and the place was going absolutely crackers. Now at this point I'm sort of 10, 11 years out of being in hospital and treated. But when they played All These Things That I've Done, it took me away, it took me back. I was reflecting during the song on where I was. Nothing too corny or cheesy, but I was allowing myself to drift back a bit and get lost in the moment. And again, tears were running down my cheek, and it was emotional, and it was a moment I'll always remember. There are moments, some of these moments leaving hospital, but being a bit of an anticlimax. When I was in Worcester, against leaving for good, I think it's good to have things to look forward to have plans. I had moments when I was travelling, when I was sat in up a waterfall, having scaled a mountain and could oversee some paddy fields, which I think I've definitely spoken about before, having a moment of clarity when I'd pat myself on the back. These moments matter. And always, if you're listening to this and you're embarking on treatment at the moment, you're in the middle of it, I absolutely urge you to hang on to those dreams, those moments, no matter how big or small. If it's as little as just getting out of the hospital room to go and get a breakfast, or whether it's leaving treatment behind you, or actually putting it all to bed and focusing on recovering, hang on to them and try and savour every bit of it as it happens. Because like me, when you're 12 years down the line, nearly 12 years down the line, you may have a song, a smell or anything that takes you back. And for me, it's important for me never to forget those moments from where I was, and importantly to be able to share with everyone else, to give them hope for them on their own journey. Thank you.